First off, this 90-day extension, was that any surprise to you?
A bit surprising, but then on the other hand, there's only one country that the United States probably needs more than the other way around, and that's China. And China is the only country that probably just does not lay down during these tariff negotiations and actually can reciprocate with steep tariffs against us. And so this will go on. And when we get to November 9th, is it pushed back even again? Could be.
So even before November 9th, right, folks have been talking about an October surprise, and that is potentially the president and his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping sitting down and meeting, holding a summit, in other words, right? In order for that to happen, there's got to be a deal on the table, which both sides are basically have agreed to, and the meeting and the signing, that's almost sort of pro forma, right? What I'm trying to figure out is where do you think the U.S.-China relationship is right now? Because, all right, we've got the rare earths going again from China to the U.S., so that's good. But in exchange, right, in this, we can bring in the chips angle here. You know, H-20s are allowed back into China. All sorts of things are allowed back into China. Chip design software, GE aircraft engines, etc. It seems as though China has a lot of leverage right now. Does that? How do you read it?
I think China indeed has a lot of leverage because they can reciprocate to the tune that nobody else can. It's interesting to me with the NVIDIA and AMD deal, which I said in my note is essentially a reverse tariff, something unprecedented. I can't recall when this was ever done before, but of course our president lives in that world to keep everybody on their toes. But in that particular deal, NVIDIA and AMD paid the price. So it goes to show you that the Chinese have a lot of leverage and they didn't necessarily succumb. NVIDIA and AMD are so desperate for those revenues because it's such a big market, they are paying the price, which I think is pretty interesting.
It is, and you know this assumes, let's get to the question of who's actually going to pay this 15%, right? NVIDIA, AMD, I guess they're going to try, and if they can, they probably can, right, raise prices, which means the Chinese are going to have to eat that 15%. How are they going to feel about that, do you think?
They're going to be furious about it, and I think it's probably going to draw out these negotiations, and maybe that's why we pushed all the way to November 9th, and I wouldn't be surprised if we push further. But the profit margins are so high on these GPU chips around the world because there's not enough supply and there's voracious demand. And so can NVIDIA and AMD raise prices to offset? They probably can, but we'll see what happens in the end. Very interesting news, and we'll have to see how it plays out. Maybe there'll be more than just one of these deals. We'll see.
Yeah, and what do you think about the idea of the U.S. government cutting deals like this with individual companies? And you just alluded to the possibility of more of these similar types of deals. Is that a risk to the markets and perhaps investors who have interest in these individual companies down the road?
Oh, sure. This is startling news when you think about it. The board of directors of a company, which hires and fires the management of the company, are bound as fiduciaries to do one thing: do what's right by the shareholders. And so if you have the president of these United States, regardless of how powerful he or she may be, to go in and upset that balance, quite interesting. And then you see, even with Elon Musk and Tesla, you know, the on again, then the off again relationship. And then today, I thought was almost comical. A couple of days ago, Trump cited the CEO of Intel for his affiliation with Chinese companies and what kind of risk that brings to the United States. But then, when the very same CEO went to the White House today, he turned around in a press conference and said he was great. So that is very odd.
Very odd. And President Trump actually wrote after that meeting with Intel CEO, his success and rise is an amazing story. Paul, what do you think actually happened with Intel? I know it is a head scratcher, and perhaps it's not really fair for me to ask you what do you think happened with Intel CEO and Trump, but we've got this big, beautiful idea of manufacturing things in the United States, and Intel could have been a key part of that division. And at one point, the market thought that Intel could actually play an important role in all this. And then calling on the CEO to resign and talking about his potential links to China. What do you think is really behind in all this?
So there's a battle going on at Intel between the chairman of the board and the CEO. One wants to shut down the foundry business, which is the outsourced manufacturer, a la something like TSMC and Samsung. And then the other wants to dig in. So I think what happened is that battle spilled over, and as he always does, our president got involved. But it is a really important question to be solved, because if you believe that the U.S. is going to successfully manufacture chips, then you really have to have Intel succeed, because there's not that many other games in town. Manufacturing is coming from abroad to the United States for semiconductors, but the major players will be Samsung and TSMC just building fabs or manufacturing facilities here. So if Intel is out of that business, then we really are essentially ceding to foreign companies, whether they're building chips afar or they're building here in our country.
Because of that vision, do you think that Intel it still has a story? Because I've seen a lot of AI bulls, tech bulls, writing off their playbook in terms of as a stock to invest, because the story is just so far from artificial intelligence at the moment.
Yeah, of course, over the years, Intel has made a mistake not to become a outsourcer. They spent a ton of money, and regardless of the fact that they insourced all their manufacturing, they still got behind in the manufacturing technology curve and lost a lot of ground to AMD and to others. So I think years ago, they could have been a foundry. Unfortunately, at this point, regardless of how much money they spend, it might be too late.
Paul, you know, I want to get your take on the whole national security angle, right? Under the Biden administration, the approach was basically deny them, right, our most advanced technology. Under President Trump now, it seems to have shifted to, look, from deny to let's try and dominate, right? Keep them addicted to our AI stack. And, you know, but this is controversial, because I want to read you a quote, and this is from somebody who used to work for President Biden, Saif Khan, former director of technology and national security at the White House National Security Council. He said, look, this is going to could directly lead to China leapfrogging America in AI capabilities. You agree? Or are you concerned?
I am concerned, because at the end of the day, there'll be two powerhouses. And ever since the advent of the DeepSeek model early in 2025, you can see that the Chinese can build a very impressive, very efficient large language model and scale it up at a much lower cost. And so the way I look at this is Trump was of Biden's belief that you have to control these exports, but then he got a visit from Jensen Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA. And I think in that meeting alone, he changed the president's mind, because he's the one that's always advocated that we must ship everything we can make to China so they have a dependence on our chips, and then they essentially relax building their own. But I think no matter what happens here, the Chinese will be very aggressive, ramping their capabilities, and I imagine that they will be on par with us, very strong competitor in AI, and then probably in quantum computing after AI.
You know, that sort of thinking, Paul, would you agree that that is kind of naive, right? Because, I mean, giving them our best stuff, et cetera, you know, it could keep them addicted, as it were, but only up until the point where they're able to do it themselves. And we know, right, from a heck of a lot of reports that that's the plan over in China. It comes from the very top. It's DIY. I mean, use foreign chips and technology as and when you need to, if you must. But once we're able to do it ourselves, let's do that.
And of course, we design in Silicon Valley, but even the most sophisticated designs are dominated by Taiwan Semi. And at some point, if Xi Jinping decides he wants Taiwan Semi, he already has a plan to capture the island of Taiwan and bring it back into the mainland's control. So that's probably all part of his script.